Yeah,
Yeah.
from you.
Yeah.
From you.
Just to know, make sure it's recording. You'll see that it's counting down like a timer. Stop.
Yeah,
Okay.
the timer should be moving,
Yep.
and you want your eyeballs on the sound. You don't want them on the interview.
Yeah.
So you want to constantly be on those levels. Whenever you're ready.
You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Please tell us your name and where you're from.
My name is Victor Abinshuti. I am from Rwanda. This is in Central Africa.
Okay, Victor, we're going to start off by, if you could please tell us in detail about your early years growing up, your hometown, your home life, your family, your friends, what you did as a little kid.
All right. My early life is, just like the typical life of anyone. We lived in a small neighborhood, about 15 minutes outside of downtown Kigali. We lived here until I was 8. This was myself, my brother, my sister, my mother, and my aunt. And we did just everything else. We played. We built toy cars. Typically, usually in America, you see kids go to Walmart and buy toy cars. And here we actually built them for ourselves. Went to school just like everybody else. We no school buses, for example. We actually walked. Let's say about 4 or 5 miles every morning and back and forth to go to school and to come back home as well. So that's why we knew the neighborhood pretty well, just by walking in for school and all that. Otherwise, that's pretty much everything. I don't know if you have any other.
Can you just tell me about your family, mother, father,
Mm-hmm.
sister, aunt?
Yeah. My sister was the oldest. And my brother. I'm the youngest in my family, so I have an older brother and an older sister. And so my sister, we actually didn't spend too much time together because by the time when I was born, she had started to live in the village with her grandparents, and also when school came for her. When you get to high school for us, you actually go away. And rather you go away and study, and then you come back for home for vacation. So we didn't spend too much time together prior to genocide, my father himself, he passed away long before genocide. He passed away when I was 3 months. He had malaria, and so that's that. And then my mother, she worked for a company, for a steel company. She was an accountant, if I'm not mistaken, for a steel company. And so yeah, she took care of us by herself. And as far as my aunt, she was a student. My auntie was a student, and she worked and went to school, and actually was trying to go to study away, to study in another country. I believe she was trying to go to Uganda for studying when all this broke out, but she never made it. But
Victor, just if you could tell me about your best friend,
mm-hmm.
what your house was like, what you studied in school, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. There's this one kid. My best friend. His name is Janjri, and we went to school together. Simply because he was my friend because a lot of the other kids were bullies and so forth. Whereas he and I. We typically chose to stay out of it, out of the fighting, one way or the other. We didn't pick sides, if so to say. But obviously, if it came to our side, then yeah, we'd finish it. But just because he and I understood each other, so those are the reasons why he was my best friend. As far as school goes, schools are the same exact thing as you would see here now. The contexts are different. Obviously, the methods are different. Over there, we'll study. Usually, it'll be that we study. One teacher will teach you everything. In elementary school, just like here. For example, things like lunch breaks are typically non-existent. If they're there, it's that you get out and for lunch break you go home actually and come back in the afternoon. So in America, for example, you go to school and you have a 45-minute lunch period. At home, you go to school between 8 a.m. and 12, and you'll finish and typically you'll go home for lunch and come back later. Lunches are obviously not provided. That's the point I'm trying to drive home. Otherwise, you have to here they you know you have to buy here the schools provide the books typically. Over home you have to actually buy your own books. In fact, actually, schools are paid for. Even if it was public schools, you still have to pay here. Whereas only here you have to pay for private schools. Otherwise, everything else is free. So.
Could you explain your views an 8-year-old kid on education? Did you value education? Is that something you really, really, really wanted, or was it just I had to go to school, so I went to school?
At the time, I had to go to school. I think my family overall valued education very well. So my parents they value education very well. So yeah, we had to go to school, and so that was the attitude at the time. Later on in life, I started to actually value education and realize. But then that's the normal for every kid. So.
How was it around your house? What was everyone doing on a typical day? What was going on?
The African. Go ahead.
To rephrase the question into your answer.
So what were everyone doing around my house? What was everyday life like? The African life, in fact, the Rwandan life overall is different from what you would imagine. I mean, things, you get up. Usually the parents would go to work. That's a normal thing. The kids would go to school. Usually we'll have a lot of households would have a maid, for example, and someone who helps around the house, and typically actually lives at the house as well. And so she'll go to the market and get everyday foods, and she actually typically went to the market every day. You're probably asking yourself why not have a fridge, but see, not everyone has fridges, if at all. And also because of not everyone has power in terms of electricity, so the fridge would be useless anyway. So but usually when we came home from everyone rounded up from school, from work, and everything, usually with our particular family, we'd like to just hang out and tell stories of whatever happened at work or at school, or just or usually my mom she'll engage us sometime in Bible study, for example, at the end of the day, not a few times a week, for example. And then after that, it's just getting ready, doing homework. That was the norm, doing homework, and then getting ready for dinner. Dinners are very late in our culture. I mean, you're talking 9 o'clock dinners. So.
We spoke about this in the car on the way up. Before the genocide,
Mm-hmm.
could you speak a little bit about faith, your religious background?
Yeah. Before the genocide, I was and my entire family actually were Seventh-day Adventists, and so we're very, very strong in terms of faith, in terms of church, in terms of God. We're very, very strong, and that's which is why actually my parents, my mother, she always taught us she always tried everything she could to shield us from everything that was going around here. She always taught us to look at people as people, nothing else. Good people, bad people. But whatever decision you make as to whether or not you judge someone to be good or bad, let it be based on their actions and not on whatever their ID card says or something. You know what I mean? So she did her best, and I'll tell you right now, she succeeded in shielding us from those things.
Cameras rolling.
Okay, Victor. The next portion that we're going to talk about, I have it labeled in here as the road to genocide. So underneath my bullets, it says things like discuss the historical differences between Hutu and Tutsi in your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then I have talking about any visible turning points that you witnessed.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, propaganda and other warning signs, paper violence, legislation, physical violence, harassment between the two groups.
Mm-hmm.
More or less, the steps that may have been evident. I know that you were a young
Mm-hmm.
boy, as an 8-year-old something might happen. Everything kind of until the plane crash in
Mhm.
early April.
Mhm.
And of course, as an 8-year-old child, if you didn't witness those things or were shielded, perhaps,
Mhm.
from your mom, or by your mom rather, then they're just as, so you can tell it as you saw it.
Mhm. I would say the road to genocide. First of all, the historical differences between Tutsis and Hutus really lie in where they come from. If you look at they both arrived in this country. Originally, the country was occupied by a group called the Twa. Today they're a very minority group, maybe 1 or 2% of the Rwandan population, and so the Hutus arrived here first before the Tutsis. They arrived from what is today Chad, and so. And obviously, if you look at where Chad is, if you compare it to where the Tutsis came from, which is Ethiopia, Chad is a little closer, I would say, to the equator. And so naturally, they might look a little darker, for example, based on those things. And so they both arrived here as nomads. If you guys know what nomads are, travelers typically with herds of cattle, and they eat the cattle, and they move on through desert until eventually they found Rwanda and settled here. Now the problem is, at least and I look at this period from a scientific point of view, is the fact that the ratio of Tutsis to Hutus favors the Hutus by a lot. I mean, by the time of genocide, we're talking 9-to-1 ratio. So I truly believe, had they arrived here in numbers that were somewhat equal, this thing might have turned out a little differently. But yeah, so those are the differences, just where they come from. Now, when they arrived, they lived in okay. The rations were not always great, but they were never bad. And then eventually, in colonial era, it was Germans that arrived first, looking for resources, looking for treasures and so forth. And quickly they realized that that such was not in this country. That this country was not as valuable as other countries. So they moved on, and then the Belgians arrived, and the Belgians, for whatever reason, and you can read on Google and realize all the speculation as to why they did, but they preferred the Tutsi group over the Hutu group, and that is really what started the pure hatred between the two groups. Is the preference of just the Belgians. They would do things, many things, for one, they started enslaving the population altogether, and then and in some cases they would put people, Tutsis, in charge of groups of slaves, Hutu slaves. Now, being enslaved is one thing, but being enslaved in your own country by your own people is a whole other thing, and that creates a hatred, which is extremely difficult to get rid of in the future. And so that's what those are the historical differences, and that's where the conflict and differences actually started throughout history. And eventually, the Belgians also left, and when they did, they handed the control and the power of that country to a Tutsi king, and he. Very fast, he was removed by the Hutu population. Like I said, they outnumber the Tutsis by quite a lot. So they removed him very quickly and took over the country. And so, throughout the years, over a period of about 150 years, they would internally kill a lot of Tutsis in the country, a little, but not in the kinds of numbers that you saw tell they were just isolated. The majors, in college for them would be chosen to be teachers, for example. Nothing political and nothing military. So that would be for me the biggest sign of a group being isolated and having its plans for that group already laid out, and if something, and actually working towards that plan. That would be the biggest sign for me.
Okay.
Okay, Victor, the next portion. Do you guys have any questions before we move forward?
Nope.
On that stuff, road 2, warning signs?
No, I don't. Can just
I do have a question, so when he starts rolling again. Are we rolling?
Yeah.
Victor, if you could talk me briefly too about the ID cards.
Mm-hmm.
When did the ID cards come into play? And then, for instance, I'm assuming, again, I'm making the assumption that your mother, probably on her ID card,
Mm-hmm.
probably said about all the children she had.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could talk about the ID card a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Helpful.
Yep. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. The ID cards usually would identify where you were born, and to be honest, the biggest thing it identified was that you were Tutsi or Hutu. Otherwise, it identify where you were born, your age. I'm not quite sure that it actually listed the amount of children you had, but I'm almost sure that it did not. But yeah, so your name and last name, for example, would be on there. And my brother and I, were too little at the time to have that ID card. And that, to be honest, that is why that's a huge reason as to our survival, is the fact that roadblocks that we arrived to, did not require us to show it because we were too young. So, but yeah, my mother had one, my auntie had one. But myself, my brother, and my sister were still too young. I think my sister was edging to a point where she actually would need one. I think 17 was the age. I'm not quite sure, but 17 or 18 was the age where you needed to start carrying that ID card.
Rolling?
Rolling.
Okay. Good.
The next portion deals with the genocide. So, if you could tell us your story from the day in early April when the plane crashed, where you were, what you were doing, how you found out about it, and then, of course, your travel and your hiding and your escape from your neighborhood outside of Kigali until you met up with your aunt and uncle, including all the people. It's okay, we'll edit it out.
Yes.
We'll edit out all of the sounds there, but all of the people, the names of the people that helped you out, so on and so forth.
So now, how far do you want me to go in terms of? Do you want me to go up to the point of getting into the Congo, or just up to the point of meeting my aunt and uncle?
Aunt and uncle.
Okay.
And if there are any natural breaks in it, where we might want to stop for a question, for instance, the plane crashed the next morning, then to the house where you stayed with your friends, then to the small area of woods, then back, then the trip, But actually, I think if you just go.
Every now and then we get a little past 6. That's
So on April the 6th.
On April the 6th, when all this started, I was at home, just like in a normal day. Went to school, came from school with my brother, went home, and started actually when all this started. I was actually playing soccer with the neighbors' kids, just on the next door over, and on the radio, news came, and I could hear the radio from a little bit, from just behind me, and the adults were listening to the radio, and I could tell something big was going on because they were all, around the radio, and so, but we're kids, so we just keep on playing like normal, and about 30 minutes later, after the adults had been listening, we were playing. This guy comes up the hill. We lived on a small on a small incline in the city, and so he comes up the small incline, and he's just running, just out of breath, And so we stopped and look at him and to see if he wants some water or something. And he tells us, go hide. They're saying that we killed their president and they're killing people. So you should probably go hide and so forth. I'm not sure that he knew that we were Tutsis or not. I'm not sure, but that was his message. He was running scared basically. And we're kids, so we didn't take him seriously. From what I can remember, I don't think the adults actually heard him. I think he was just yelling loud, hoping. He was just passing by as he yelled, so I don't actually think the adults heard him. But so later on, we stopped. We stopped playing soccer and just went home for dinner and went to bed. And the next morning, we realized how serious he was because we woke up to sounds of AK-47s, AK rounds, basically. That's what woke us up. We're talking 5 a.m., 5:30 a.m. is what woke us up. And so after waking up, we stayed in the house for a little bit, and you're just hoping that those rounds will go away, and things, whatever the situation was, it'll just die down. And actually, little by it went more intense as the day went on. So at about 8 or 9 a.m., after the sun has come up and so forth, we went into the same neighbor's house that we were playing soccer with his kids. I went into that neighbor's house, and it was a good friend of the family. So this is just you're hearing, and at this point, all we're doing is really hearing the rounds from a distance. So no one has actually started to come up to our neighborhood and start killing anyone. So we just want to know. So we just went to their house. It was myself, my brother, and my aunt. Otherwise, my sister and my mother were in the village. So when there was just to see what's going on, to see if they know anything about what's going on. So we stayed there. We stayed there for the whole day, and the rounds just got more intense. And actually, now they started mixing in with louder explosions, which are most likely mortar shells or RPG shells. And we slept in that house. We didn't want to. We wanted whatever the situation was. And as propaganda as the radio went on, they started to realize, okay, this was a little serious. So we figured, why don't all just stay together? And there were a few more families that came to that house as well. And so on the next day, when the word came that they were starting to go door to door looking for people, we just couldn't stay in this house anymore. For one, the food was running out of the house. But not only that, though, it was just, we just didn't want to be found in the same group. In one group all at once. So, you want to increase your chances of survival. So my brother and I, we went into my auntie, she told my brother and I to go into this other neighbor's house. His name was Joseph. We called him Joe. And so he's a Hutu. And he's a very, very old friend of the family, good friend of the family. He had his own wife and his own kid. And so so my brother and I went into that house, and my auntie, she actually told us where she was going, which was another friend's house who lived just about a half mile further towards a little bit of a waterfall. And so she'll hide. So the plan was for her to hide there, and we'll hide at Joe's house, and then we'll reunite if and when this goes down. And so when we got to Joe's, and that actually would be the last time we'd ever see our aunt. So when we arrived at Joe's house, so there was no question in our minds that he would actually help us. And even when we were there was no hesitation. He took us into the door really quickly, and so he put us in this one little room in his house. It's kind of like a small closet where it's isolated from the rest of the house. So if like a quick search was coming, we can kind of hide out that way. We spent a day here, but and so we got to this house at about 8 or 9 a.m. and we spent the rest of the day here. As the searchings became more and more intense, it was just not possible to stay in the house anymore. That endangers us, it endangers his family as well. So he sent us out of the house and into he lived on a big property. And on that property had in addition to his house and so forth, it also had a sort of bushes that grew on the property, about 2 to 3 feet high. And so we went, and actually went into those bushes. It was a big field. It was a big enough field. And so we went into those bushes, and that is where we hid. We stayed there for. And actually, when his son, when we left into those bushes, his son came with us. And I was only 8, and I actually at this point did not even know what a Tutsi nor Hutu was. So I actually took his son with us. I would say, come, if we have to, I figure if we have to hide, why not? Why should he not come with us? So, and then his father called him back, and I remember just being very troubled for my time in these woods. I was very troubled because I could just never figure out why the boy didn't have to hide with us. So we went in here, and we stayed 2 days. We stayed in here for 2 days, and things had started to go much more intense. The searchings, and the shells of mortar and weaponry and guns had started to die down, because the first few days were just military killing, whereas later on it was just civilian killing at that point. So, and they used machetes and other household weapons. So we stayed there for 2 days, and somehow Joseph had a hint from a friend that they were, and I suspect that this friend might have known that he was hiding us. Otherwise, why would he give him that specific hint? It's one of those things where he kind of knew, but he didn't want to address it. He just wanted to stay neutral. So he told, he told him that a group of people are coming specifically to search your house, and it might just be someone started detecting he was hiding some people, who knows, and they're going to search your entire property. So, and they were going to search his house and the property, not just the house. He actually got that hint that they're coming with the sole purpose of searching everything. So, at this point, we decided to go to this other house. He told us to go to this other house, and there was another neighbor's house who we played with his kids long enough to know, for example, that the bars on the windows would be wide enough for us to fit into. And since he had a hint that this was going to happen, so he left with his family a long time ago. So there was a So yeah, so as we went to this other neighbor's house, he had left a long time ago, locked his house and left. He had a hint that something was going to happen, and so we knew from playing with his kids that the bars on his windows were wide enough for us to fit in, because we played with the kids, and so we slipped in there and closed the doors, and so we actually stayed there under the beds overnight. And in the same night, actually, men came to search that house, and we could hear them debating. It was a little late, at about 6 or 7. We could hear them debating whether or not to enter this house. And actually, they knew by the padlock they could tell. They were sure there was no one in the house, but they figured, why not just rob it? And after, as time goes within genocide, it becomes about not just the killing and so forth, but also the robbery, the looting of their belongings and so forth. So you kill them and you take what they have. So they figured, why not just take everything? And we could hear Joseph convince them, oh guys, there's nobody here. It's kind of late. We should probably just come back for this in the morning. You know what I mean, or tomorrow, because he's like, I'm tired. And so, and by now, they had been drinking and killing all this. They're tired, and they actually decide to just walk away and come back. So from that, so when they left, the next morning we left long before they even got there. I'm not even sure that they did or did not return, because once we left this house, we never returned to it. So we left this house, and we went back to the same woods, to the same place that we were hiding earlier on in the woods that are on Joe's property. And now, from this point on, we stayed here for the remainder. We stayed here for about a week, rather for about a week and a half to 2 weeks. All in all, I would say we stayed we stayed with Joe for about 2 or 2.5 weeks, and 2 days first, and then the rest later on. I could be wrong, but those are just estimations. And over those periods of those 2 week period of time, you see all kinds of things. We were on like I said, on a small hill. There was a small road that comes out of the main road, out of town, and goes up. And so you would see people come, and then they would turn them left and actually take them towards a waterfall. And those guys would never come back. Now, when they took them, you would see. I mean, they'd be injured. They'd be a lot of the women would be naked. You know what I mean? And so we lived like this. And at night, Joe would bring us food. For example, he would throw it. And we'd crawl to it. Simply because he doesn't want to take it. It's better for it to look as though he's throwing the food away, or he's throwing something away into the woods. That would otherwise, if he actually delivers, if someone sees him, then they're going to question, why is he there? And there goes the end of that. So he would bring it when he can. He would actually come crawl and talk to us. Typically, like in the middle of the night when everyone is asleep, he would tell us of what's going on, and he would tell us, be not afraid. This will be over soon, and you guys will be able to go back home. Um, you know, and so we stay here for, living like that and seeing these things and eating. And actually, when we went in there, he gave us 2 charcoal sacks to stay in. In Rwanda, a lot of cooking is done on charcoal, not on stoves in the house, things like that. So you have to buy charcoal in large sacks, and so we took 2 of them, and that's how we stayed. And there we would just slip into them and just go to bed and sleep. And eventually, sometime later, anywhere from 2 to 2.5 weeks later, the rebels started to attack the capital city. So now Joe is a Hutu. He has to leave regardless. I mean, when the rebels arrive, it'll make no difference to him that he did or did not save, two Tutsi kids. It won't make a difference. So he has to leave with his family, and he has to leave really fast. So he comes to us and he tells us, rebels when they arrive here, just raise your hands, tell them who you are, and show me your house and what happened, and they won't harm you. And this is a good plan, simply because he's running away with a whole lot of Hutus from that neighborhood. So if any one of them recognizes us, they'll stop. Sure, they're running scared from rebels, but they'll take that last little joy to kill us, but also kill him with his family because he's a traitor. So yeah, it's a good plan. It's in terms of it's the best plan, basically. You know what I mean? So he left, and so about 2 to 3 hours later, we've been sitting in the same woods. But the fighting between the rebels and what's left of the Rwandan army in the capital is getting too intense. You see mortar shells flying all over the place, and they're landing. So the point is we're just in a war zone, and we're in the middle of something, and no matter what happens, when rebels come, who knows that they're even going to stop and figure out who we are. The point is it gets so intense that it just becomes impossible to stay here. So we just decided to get out and run towards the capital city, towards downtown, basically. And this is because our auntie and uncle lived in downtown. We didn't even go back home because Joe had been telling us of what happened, and he actually told us they eventually caught up with their aunt. So we knew there was nothing left at home to go for, because we could actually tell them. We could see from his position, from where we were sitting, we could see them rob the house and so forth. So they thrashed, and there was nothing left. So we decided to run towards the city. And so eventually, when we got to that, when we're running towards the city, the point is we're gonna do this. Since the main road is clogged with a lot of people fleeing the rebels, we did this in the forest. So we'll run parallel with them, parallel to them on the main road, but we'll do it in the forest, so as to avoid interaction and so as to avoid being detected. So. Yeah.
ID that you don't know.
So what do you mean?
From you go to hiding first at the house,
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth. But you didn't talk about your mom and sister. You mentioned earlier that they were in a village.
Yeah, they were in a village later on, and eventually, I actually eventually find out about them later. So
Okay,
I figure I'd get to. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Okay, so so now the plan, as we're running parallel in the woods, there on the main road, and the idea is to get to our aunt and uncle who lived in downtown of the capital city, and it's actually not too far, but the streets are clubber, so we just as we run towards these towards the capital city, towards the downtown, you can see bodies everywhere in the woods. I mean, you're talking just in piles sometime, or just one by one. Sometimes you actually have to avoid stepping on them. And this is where for me the weirdest thing happened. I was only 8 at the time, and you're talking about the single most hostile environment you can imagine. And as we're running, we see by this house. We knew the guy whose house we went by, and just in his yard there was a small stove running and boiling water. And I'm wondering, why is there water? And my brother and I were wondering, why is there water boiling? And this is the middle of war zone, So we actually stopped at his house, and we knocked. Now, this is probably the dumbest thing we could have done at this point, because you don't know what you're going to find in this house. But when we got into this house, it was just all doors were empty. But we found this guy sleeping, and he had a huge growth, some kind of tumor, some kind of growth on his leg, which from what I could tell prevented him from being able to walk, anything like that. His wife and kid, we could tell, had already been gone a long time ago. So we got him up. We took him, we put him on our shoulders, and we started running with him. But he was, he started, no more than a mile later, he realized he was slowing us down. So he told us, he thanked us for waking him up and getting him on his feet. But he says he'll be fine. Just you kids just run. So we left. And eventually I did actually see him later again, which goes to tell me he survived at least the city. And so we left, and eventually as we're running towards the downtown part of the city, the forest that we're in actually runs out to a point where we actually have to cut into the main road like everybody else. But by the time we have to do it, it's so filled with people that you can keep a low profile, and as long as no one notices you, it's so much chaos. I mean, you're talking thousands of people on a road, on a 2-lane road. It's not even that big of a road. So, if you keep a low profile and not be recognized, you should be okay. And hopefully a whole lot of luck as well in our case. So, as we make it, actually, we eventually go over the small little bridge that has the Nyabugogo waterway, and it was, at the time, it was so, you could just tell bodies floating around, on the water. And we crossed it, and, if we're going towards the city, our auntie, she lives on the bottom part of the city. So, and the way, there was a gate there that prevented anyone from going into the bottom part of that city. So we actually were unable to reach her house, our original destination. Which turned out to be a good thing for us because she was long dead. In our plans, she was long dead before we would have even got there. So now since we're unable to do it, we figured, okay, we're in downtown. The next best thing to do is to go towards another aunt and uncle who lived in Butare, because there were no other family for us in the city. If we can't reach her, then the next best thing is to go towards Butare, and that's where everyone else were going towards as well. So it's easier for us to travel in this huge group of people who do not know us if we're going to do it, rather than to try to go into this isolated, try to make our way down into the city where some people might recognize us. So we got on the road with huge groups of people towards Butare, and we as we kept going on the road, for hours, many miles later, we caught up with found Joe again. He stopped at a gas station. And he was just there. He didn't have a car, so it was just a way for him to stop and rest. And he was with his wife and kids. And right away, as soon as he sees us, he takes us and embraces us, somewhat loudly. So and when he mentions family, just so everyone can realize that we're family, so as not to question how he knows his kids. Because as soon as one person even asks who we are, there goes the end. Especially since some of those people might recognize him. He was a businessman throughout the city. So he embraces us, and when we had a chance to talk later, we told him it got just a little too dangerous to stay there, and so we just got scared and left. And you could tell he was happy that we made that decision, because he made the decision to let us go and so forth. And in his mind, he knew it was a bad decision, but it was the best decision, just based on chances of survival. But again, he didn't have a choice. So you could tell he was kind of happy, to be able to, if it was a mistake, kind of how you feel when you realize you actually have a chance to make up for if any mistake you made. So from now on, we traveled with him towards Butare, and his wife, his kid, and my brother and I, we go ahead, and he drops back a little bit, only later on to catch up with us with a small van. And he was driving his van, and his friend was in the passenger seat, and you're probably asking yourself, where did he find his van? But in times like this, in hostile territory like this, could be 100 reasons why one person would not be able to drive his own van, and that being his friend in the passenger seat. Maybe he owes money to someone, maybe there's some friends, some of his enemies or whatever. The point is, as soon as that person sees that he's driving a van, they're taking that van. So why not give it to your friend who has a better chance of, they're looting and they're taking everything, so it's everybody for themselves. The first chance they get to take something from you, they'll take it. So this van, I suspect, belonged to that guy, and he just couldn't drive it for whatever reason. So we got in, myself, my brother, and his wife and kid. We got into the van, And we're driving, roadblock for roadblock. And as we drove through, people also got into this car, kind of a taxi thing, they would pay to, so, and every roadblock we would get to would stop about a mile short of it, and we would cross on foot. Because if you get to a roadblock with a huge van and everybody empties out, they're gonna want to see IDs. Whereas if you just go into the woods and cross and then come back to the road, you can avoid the roadblock. And then he'll just go through the roadblock with the van with his friend, and then they'll catch up to us. So we did this anywhere from 5 to 10 roadblocks, and eventually we arrived at a house, and it was just a regular house, but you could tell it had started to be used as a motel or just a way to stay and pay for a while. And this person was either family or really, really good friends with Joe. By the fact that he let us stay here for a while. It's probably they were family. If we were just friends, I highly doubt he would have just let just people stay in that. So he let us stay here at that house for about 2.5 weeks. We stayed at this house. People would come and people would go. They would buy some stuff or whatever. And in the 2-week period that we stayed here, a 2.5-week period that we stayed here, Joe started to use his van as a taxi to go from this point into Butare for money, And on one of his trips, he decides to take us with him and to complete our journey to Butare, where he would hand us to our Antenaco just as we had planned. So we made it the same plan. We made it to roadblocks, and eventually, we got to what turned out to actually be the very last roadblock before we arrived into the city, and they pulled us over. You could just tell they were not going. It was later in the day, and the problem is that one of those guys at the roadblock recognized Joe. That was the biggest problem. He recognized him, and I suppose that wouldn't be a big deal, but rather he recognized Joe, and knowing that Joe didn't have a family this big, which would involve my brother and I. He's like, Joe, I feel like I've never heard of these kids in your family, man. What's going on here, And really, the guy at the roadblock just wanted his van. He would have easily just traded, his van for us, and all would have been good. And they talk and talk. For one, he takes all the money. I mean, I could actually see Joe give him money. He was looking for car keys, but Joe had him in his hand, so he wasn't going to forcibly take those, at least not yet. And so over a long period of time, just arguing and debating and so forth, Joe starts to realize that it's unlikely he would be able to get out of here with a van and us. You know what I mean? Not. It's just it wasn't going to happen. And even I started to see it too. I mean, this guy was just getting more frustrated and more violent as time went. And he had an AK-47. He was the only one. Maybe there was 2 people maybe with an AK, but I remember he had an AK-47. Everyone else had machetes and so forth. So just as all hope is lost, this guy comes around. Now, this guy is a big shot from what I could tell. So as soon as they arrived to the roadblock, they didn't even say anything. They just lifted it up. They let him go through, no questions asked. They, hi boss, hi, So, but he also recognized Joe. Joe, like I said, he actually ran a small transport business in and out of the city. So it's only normal that big people can recognize him. So he stopped him actually. And so he told Joe, so Joe asked him, for a favor, can you drop these kids off for me in the next town? He actually told them where they to drop us off. And it turned out, I didn't recognize it when they were talking, but it turned out to be the city hall of the city hall of that town. So that, the plan was that Joe would actually, once he separated from these guys, he would find us there. And so yeah, this guy agrees. And as Joe was distracted talking with the guy at the roadblock, we slipped into the truck, into this guy's truck, into a small pickup truck, and Toyota red pickup truck. And so we left and actually got to, and he dropped us off at the city hall, just like they had agreed. And unfortunately, this is the last that we ever seen of Joe. Now, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, in all of this, the guy really, really wanted Joe's van. So it's very possible that, it's likely, in fact, because Joe had an ID card that said he was Hutu, so I doubt they harmed him, but that he actually made it back to his family with his van, highly unlikely, because that guy, I could already tell, had his mind set on taking this van no matter what happened. So yeah, Joe never made it, and that's how I know he didn't. Or if he had the van, he would have found us. But if so he never. And this was actually the very last we'd ever seen of Joe. And so they dropped us off at the city hall, and we sat just on the steps of it. No money, no cell phones, no. In my case, I actually didn't have any shoes. I left my when I started running, I didn't have time to grab my shoes, so if it started to hurt. And so we hopelessly just sat here waiting for Joe, and we waited for a long time. Anywhere from 5 to 7 hours we waited for Joe, and he wasn't going to show. Yeah. So yeah, we arrived at the city hall with Joe's friend. Unfortunately, I never took his name. But we arrived there, and he let us out of the truck, and we sat there and just waited for him for Joe for about anywhere from 5 to 7 hours, and as we did our waiting, we met exactly 3 people whom we recognized either from the city or from the villages where my grandparents lived, and each of those people told us of what happened. For whatever reason, they would know of what happened to, for example, they knew of, that's how we found out of what happened to my auntie and uncle that were going towards in the capital city. It turns out that, men came to her house for her, and, her husband, he jumped, he actually escaped, and that's one thing I can never actually be okay with, is the idea of this guy leaving his wife and kids. So, but they killed the wife and kids, which is actually, had he just stayed, if he had an ID card that said it was Hutu, the kids would have been saved, because by default the kids are Hutu, so he had, so, and I guess, I don't know if it's easy for me to sit here and say, but I don't think anyone wants to make the decision of who lives between his wife and kids, so he ran. And then so the one person told us of that, and then another person told us of what happened to this uncle, my mother's brother, and he owned a restaurant in the city, and he actually was able to escape for a moment, got on his motorcycle and ran, and I think he actually struck one of them. And so he was able to make his way and run on his motorcycle, but when he got to a roadblock, it was a dirt bike, and he tried to jump over it, but it clipped the bottom of one of the wheels, and it flipped him, and they beat him to death, apparently. And so he knew of that, And then the third guy told us what happened to our mother and sister, and they were killed in Kibuye, and he had some details as to what happened, which turned out, the details of their death turned out he was wrong. He was right in where they died and when, but he wasn't correct in the methods of, I think he had told us of them having been buried alive. But it turns out, and my uncle visited us recently. He actually confirmed to us that they actually were to put up they got into a huge group on the hills, in the hills, where they were visiting, and put up a fight, actually a good fight from what I could tell, for about 3 days, until it just, eventually the groups came and more and just overwhelmed them in numbers. But they actually put up a good fight, so that was a little bit of a comfort for myself to know that they fought for a little bit, So that's how we actually found out of what happened to our family. So, and after this third guy left, and by now, I was, like I mentioned, you guys, I was only 8 at the time, and throughout in all of this, really, I'd seen so much death by the time I arrived to Butare, and so much, I'd seen so much that, it started to register in my mind that it's likely that I'm probably not gonna make it out of here. Only thing I really wanted to do was just to get back to my mom, and to be honest with you, when they went to visit in the village, I left with them. I actually went to the village with them, but I injured my foot playing again, and so I had to come into the city to see a doctor, and that's how we separated. I just wanted to see her again, because I didn't want the last thing for me to be. I didn't want the last interaction between myself and my mother to be me leaving her in a village. You know what I mean? I just wanted to see her again, and then we'll let that, whatever happens. But after I realized that was no longer possible, now it switches from not necessarily of being okay, with being killed, but rather it's now that I'm gonna try the best I can to survive and actually have my revenge whenever possible. And if I have to go, let it be that I at least do something, where I injure the person, mark him. I actually picked up a small sharp rock, and I had it in my hands the whole time. And the idea for me, I could picture all this in my head, was I would probably just go for his face and slash him. So 10 years later, he would have a mark on his face, knowing I didn't, I actually went out I actually defended myself, and I didn't wait for him to make the decision. You know what I mean? So that it becomes more. I become a bit more aggressive. You know, I was okay with dying earlier, just as long as I saw my mom. But so long as that's not possible, now I become a little more aggressive. And so a little while later, as we realized, eventually it registered in our mind that Joe was not going to show up. We took the decision. My brother and I, we couldn't stay in front of City Hall because you could already tell some people that were in and out were starting to wonder who these kids are. And so we decided we just picked a direction. We didn't really know. We didn't even know the city, to be honest. We had been here 4 months ago when our aunt and uncle were getting married. So, but otherwise we didn't really know the city that well. So we just, picked a direction, random, just left. And we just started walking, and we just didn't know what to do at this point. And so on our walk, this is probably one of the luckiest, because we could have easily have gone left, right or left, but we just went forward, and we found this lady. We recognized her. She actually took part in my auntie's wedding about 4 months ago, and my brother recognized her, or she recognized him. Even I recognized her, but I don't really know who she saw in us, or who she saw between myself and my brother, or if it's my brother that called out to her. I can't really remember that, but she was just taking a walk with her boyfriend. And Butare, remember the genocide and the fighting. You just imagine a wave that started in the capital city, slowly making its way throughout the whole country. So Butare, there are some killings here and there, but not the 10,000 a day average that eventually turned out to be. You know what I mean? So it's at this point it's okay. It's somewhat normal, especially if they're Hutus, for them to take a walk. You know what I mean? Whereas in the capital city, absolutely not. So she crossed over. She was on the other side of the road. She crossed over, and we just asked her where our auntie and uncle lived, if she can just help us get there. And she was nice enough to actually put us in a cab, and she actually left her boyfriend there, and she just got into a cab with us. And you could already tell she knew exactly what to show. She knew exactly where we're coming from and why we were here. I mean, you see two kids, clothes all torn apart and tired and hungry and so forth, and they used to live in the capital city. She knew what the situation was. She wasn't going to go into it because she didn't know what her boyfriend might think. So she just got us into a cab, and we went straight to the house. And that, otherwise, if it was a normal situation, she would have just pointed us to how to get there. But the fact that she didn't want us to interact with anyone else between now and the time we get to them. So we so she got us to put us into a cab, and eventually and I forget her name as well, but she got us to our aunt and uncle in Butare, and they lived in a college town, in a small college town. And so which is why the attack in this town would be delayed, just because it's a college town. So they would rather attack other parts of the city first, and then eventually get to a town, to a college town, to college dorms. Actually, it wasn't a dorm like on campus, so to say, but they were campus housings. Just houses off campus where you live. I think they do it that here too, but and then they also had college dorms. But yeah, so.
Journey. If you could just answer me that now. How long was that?
I would say, yeah, it's a
1 month journey. That took. Okay, cool. Now, in that time, we had spoken on the way in about the radio. Did you hear the radio, and what messages were you hearing on the radio? We had to wait for that. I don't know that one I answered.
Ready.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just if you could talk about the radio, if you remember.
Oh,
Yeah.
hang on one second. Your mic slipped down there.
Oh, you gotta go to the bathroom? Alright, we'll wait till Booch comes back. Whenever you see a red Toyota truck, do you think about that?
Yeah. That's
Yes, on the radio, little by little. When we started traveling, eventually we caught up with Joe and got into the van. There was a radio on the van, and so yeah, we'd hear a lot of things. It lived no one, lived none of them alive. Those cockroaches, and that's the term they give the Tutsi population, especially. I mean, that had always been the case, but it was never driven as much as was in the genocide. So on the radio, would hear things. Make sure you leave none of them standing. If you're not sure, then leave no mistakes. If you're not sure that they are not Tutsi, don't take any chances. Those kinds of things. And if they would call things out, like if you don't have the weapons it takes, they would have specific locations where you can just go and pick up a machete, or we have the weapons for you. Go to work. It's not so much go kill, but they would use the term like go to work. Our people have to go to work. You make sure you do. You put in a good day's work and so forth. So that's the kind of those are the kinds of messages I could hear little by little. So the term work, the term cockroaches, and also the term of where the place where they could pick up weapons. I couldn't remember. I mean, like I can't pinpoint exactly where it was, but I specifically remember hearing someone telling them where to go pick up a machete should they need one. Say do not be absent from work because you don't have a machete. We'll provide one. So.
Just tell the story from your aunt and uncle's house.
Mhm.
You can probably take that all the way up to Togo if you want.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. All right. So.
With description of the refugee camp.
Yeah. Yeah. So we arrived at our auntie and uncle's house, and my auntie is a Tutsi, and my uncle is Hutu. So and this is let this not be a surprise. I mean, by this time there were a lot of mixed marriages, and so things were not as I sit here and describe to you. Someone might get a picture of it. It was always the personal relations were always conflicted, but not necessarily. So when we arrived here, the lack of sleep, the torn clothes, the hunger, just everything, just the tire. She actually took, I would say, about 20 seconds, no, okay, less than that, to recognize who we were, and eventually came to her who my brother and I were. Oh my, you could just tell, and so she took us in, and at least my brother and I, when we found out what happened to our family, we found out in a matter of 6 hours, where it was about a 1.5 to 2 hour intervals. But we had to let her know right there and there that, every single person she knew is no more. You know what I mean? Because we actually had the news from the villages and stuff. She didn't. She didn't know in the village. She didn't know anything. So and you could just, she just she just started crying. And to be honest, it was my brother doing the talking. I really couldn't talk at this point. Even if I wanted to. So it was my brother telling her, and she was just crying. And I really could not even cry anymore, to be honest with you, by now, because how much tears can one really shed by if you're gonna start crying for every dead person you see. For example, I had seen so much. I don't think there you could actually have that much tears in yourself. So and here we stayed with them. They right away they started cooking, and they fed us, and we started eating, and little by little my uncle, his brothers, his younger brothers, were somewhat the same size as us. So the father would bring us some clothes, for example, and because all we had on ourselves were just the clothes that we came from the city with. So little by little, shoes, clothes, those kinds of things, and so we lived with them for a period of about a month, I would say, here, and we just stayed in this house, didn't go anywhere else, and so eventually when we left, we decided to, as I told you guys, the genocide, you have the first wave of genocide, which hit in the city and started traveling throughout the rest of the country. Then you also have the wave of rebels, which are, by now, to be honest, they've taken over the capital, and that wave is also coming out. So it's two waves of one clears Tutsis, the other one takes over the country, while people are running out completely. Just while people are running from rebels, the Hutu population running from rebels. So, and by now, we arrived with them. When we arrived, it was somewhat okay. Instead of 10,000 a day, maybe you could have 2,000 in the city of Butare. But 2, 3, 4 weeks later, it was just intense as the city, and they were now, they were getting up in those numbers of 10,000 on average a day. And so we just couldn't stay here, especially that my uncle's a Hutu. He had a son by now, and his son by default is Hutu. But myself, my brother, and my auntie were Tutsis. So it's just becoming really, really impossible to stay here. So we decide, they decide, to move from this point to go towards the Congo. Now we'll do this by going first from Butare into Gikongoro, and then from Gikongoro we'll go to Cyangugu, and that's actually where the border is between Rwanda and Congo, and then so that's the plan. And so when we left Butare and the road to Gikongoro, for example, that was it wasn't okay. It wasn't. We still went through several roadblocks. For example, for my aunt and uncle, for my aunt, she claimed to have lost her ID card. And she had some letter that verified who she was, that she was a college student and so forth. It didn't specify that she was Hutu or Tutsi, but you have to understand they're not particularly trained people. Any documentation and briberies and those kinds of things, you can kind of fake your way through the roadblocks and so forth. Especially since her husband can show an identity card that says he's Hutu. They might be lenient, especially since he's going towards a city that he knows, and maybe he might know some of those. You know what I mean? So, so we got like, and like I said, my brother and I were too young to require ID cards. So which makes it easier on everyone. So we could just pretend to be, we could just say we're all refugees, running from rebels and so forth. So eventually we made it to Gikongoro. And and remember I told you guys that my foot was injured, and I never actually, I didn't arrive in the city in time enough to see the doctor, because by the time I arrived and the genocide started, I didn't have the time it required. I required to see the doctor. So that injury was actually starting to be really, really bad, and by now, when we got to Gikongoro, we lived there for some time actually, for about 3 to 4 weeks, and in those periods of time, the infection, was starting to take. And so this one lady, and like I said, Yukongo is farther from the city, from the capital city. So the genocide by now, it is happening here in higher numbers, but not as intense. And I mean, and that's only too, it's a village, so there's no way that they're gonna kill. It's gonna be as intense as is the capital city, because that's where all the weapons and all the people are. So, so here. My uncle he arranged to see this nurse, medical professional. I don't think she was a doctor, but she had some skills in medicine. She examined me. It was actually a guy. It was a gentleman, and he examined me, and he told us it's likely, if the infection is probably gonna cost my leg if I don't get it taken care of soon. So. And I couldn't even just take antibiotic pills. It was so bad at this point that I actually needed antibiotic shots to go directly into the bloodstream. So what my uncle would do here, he would go, he would go from this house to into a further town. All this by foot, by the way. And he would go and he would get, whenever he could scramble some money, and also the fact that the antibiotic shots can all come in at once. It would be one by one. Every 3, maybe 4 times a week, he would go grab a shot, bring it to me, and then I would travel from this house to this nurse's house, and she would inject me. And so, and my brother and I would go typically, and so, and this is, would go through, it had been so long that some of the bodies, that they had killed and buried were starting to, so you could see some bones that remain. It's been quite a while by now. It's been, 2 months in, so. It's been 2.5 months, and so we'd go through this, and the worst thing I saw at this point was this one church that had just been demolished. I mean, the structure was still up, but no windows, no doors, and you could see holes, small holes and big holes. For one, you could see AK-47s holes, bullets from that, and then you could see RPG, holes from RPGs. And the worst thing you could see though was the fumes. Imagine if you burned like a building or a house from inside. The fumes would come out and line themselves up on the window, in dark lines. And so you could see, right away you could tell exactly what happened there. And you can, you can actually smell, obviously, the rotting bodies, in that situation. And in this particular church always scared me because when you got here, you could just it's almost as though you can see everyone that died here. It's almost as you can see them. And so my brother, usually when we got here, would stop a little bit and rest, and then would just run across the yard away from this church as possible, and then not stop until we just would then want to be in that environment, the smell, the darkness of you know what I mean. And it's a church too; it's supposed to be sacred, but not for this particular case. So we did this for a few weeks, for about 3 to 4 weeks, and actually, the shots started working, and my foot was getting much better. And by the time we left here, and also, and when we were here as well, the intensity of rebels also started to arrive here, and the killing was still going, the genocide was still continuing throughout. But you're talking 2.5 months in by now, it's getting to a point where they've killed so many Tutsis that you just run out eventually. I mean, remember, this is only a tenth of the population. They're only about 1 million. How many can you kill? It's becoming to a point where there's just no one left to kill. The only ones that are left are guys like myself and my brother and my aunt who by now can blend in unless you just recognize them. You know what I mean? So there's just no one to kill anymore by now. And so, but the rebel force is accumulating through the country, and due to the fact that we're a mixed group of people, it's really not safe anywhere for us in this country at this point. So we left this point, and the point in all of this was to go towards the Congo, and the drive from here towards Changugu, which borders Congo and Rwanda. Just more roadblocks, more robbery, and the same thing. Just faking your way through it with fake papers or lack thereof, and so. But eventually, we actually did get to Changugu, and we for about a day or two we stayed with this. We stayed at this huge church, a Catholic church, and so with the missionaries and with a lot of the priests there. And so we stayed here for about a day or two until we crossed into the Congo, and so that's so once the border was more robbery at the borders because they realize if you're coming in, you don't really have a choice. So the guys on the other side of the border, they'll rob you and take your cars. Typically, we're interested in cars and so forth. Luckily, we didn't lose our car. And by now the methods of hiding money were very creative. I'll tell you that. If you take like but since they're robbing everyone at the border, people had become very creative with hiding their money. So some of the methods, for example, were toothpaste. If you roll the bottom of it, you can just roll a small note, a bill, and roll it into a small piece of plastic, and just roll the toothpaste open and just put it up there, and then roll the toothpaste back up. Use some of it to make it's just old used toothpaste. Nobody wants this, So that's one way. Another way was if you took like a simple slipper, like flip flops, and if you slice about the halfway point of the part that you step on, you can lay a few notes in there and then glue it back together. There goes another thing. Diapers were one thing. Hiding it in food, those were some of the things. And eventually when the guys, when they started catching on to the fact that these people are hiding money in their kids' diapers and not the kids, they would actually just grab the kids by their foot, by their leg, and just flip them and just shake till the stuff came out, and they would take whatever they find and they just give the kid back. So I actually saw that. I thought that was a bit cruel. You don't actually have to shake. You can just search them. There's no need for that. But we made it out of here and lost some money, and whatever we lost was in francs, which is at the time is a lot. But when you actually think about it, and if you could lose a bunch of francs and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So from this point on, we left, and we left once we cleared through the border. And when I say clear, they didn't really were asking for papers. They realized the situation is a refugee situation, no papers. They just want to rob you and let you go. So when we cleared and left the border, we we went into refugee camps, just like everybody else. And now, mind you, these refugee camps are full of the Hutu population, because most of the Tutsi population has been killed. I mean, the genocide succeeded to about 94.5% of killing Tutsi. So there's really no, so the fact that my brother and I here and my aunt tells me there's probably a few more. You know what I mean? Otherwise, there's not that many. So it's extremely dangerous for basically for my family, because we're mixed. And if one of them, in the refugee camps, if someone finds out, that myself and my brother and our Tutsis, they won't hesitate. I guarantee you they won't hesitate to harm us, to kill us, and just finish the job at this point. And actually, some people did get killed in the refugee camps. Some of them Hutus, some of them suspected Tutsis for whatever reason, and they would just kill them. And refugee camps, they become very hostile. So if you wanted something from someone, food or money or whatever, it's easier for you to just accuse them something, have them killed, and just take it. I mean, things are, the amount of food and resources in the refugee camp are very, very minimum. So, at first it's very hostile, especially until before the UN gets there and starts, dropping food and tents and things like that. It was just hostile territory. Now, all in all, we ended up staying in this camp for 8 months. Now, in those 8 months, about 2 of those we stayed with my uncle and aunt in their tent, in their part of the camp. But it became so dangerous for us to have, for my uncle and his wife, he can, as long as my brother and I weren't there, their kid was young enough to be their kid, and he can say, this is my wife, she's Hutu, no questions asked. But as long as my brother and I were there, people could always ask the question, who are these kids? Because he was only 24 in all of this, so he was too young to have kids, they say, this old. Not only that, if someone recognized him and realized there's no way this could be your kids, I don't remember you having these kids, those kinds of questions started rising and rising. So my brother and I, and with the family, we decided, my brother and I, to go into this one camp. There was a camp within the refugee camp, and this camp, it was an orphanage camp, for refugees who came from Rwanda, who for those kids who either lost their family in genocide or war, or who just lost their parents in the camp itself. It was, you just have massive populations, no system of ways, so you could just easily just get lost if you're a little kid. So that was a group in there. So we went into that refugee camp, and this particular one, since it was for kids, was actually sponsored by UNICEF. So you could tell it was a little better in terms of the situation, in terms of having a little more money than a regular one, food and so forth. But the problem was that the money that came into it was not actually used the way it was supposed to be used. It was rather, split among the principals, the guys who looked over the camp and so forth. So, and the monthly, typically, anywhere from a month to every 6 weeks, the UNICEF group would actually send inspectors to make sure their money and their investment is being used the way it should be used, on the kids and so forth. And so they would usually come in and pick, at random, 2 or 3 kids to talk to, just to see what's going on. And in order for us to tell them what they, to tell those inspectors what they wanted to hear, these guys would do things. For one, they would beat us up. It's a kind of you have to break the kids. You know what I mean? So they would beat us up. They would do things. The biggest thing, for example, the one thing which I thought was the most cruel thing was they would put you in this small room, this small box, where you can't move sideways or frontward, and they would drop maybe just one little droplet of water every so and so often on you, and it's dark, you can't see anything, and after a while, that droplet just becomes like a mountain. I mean, if you're here for 2-3 hours, that little, you're just not knowing when it's coming, where it's gonna hit you, it just becomes, it's just what it basically meant. It'll break someone. The whippings, they would whip us. You typically line us up on our knees and blindfold and whip. And, the whipping actually after a while becomes okay, but rather being blindfolded and you hear a whip go up and, it's going to come down, but you're not sure if it's you or the kid next to you that it'll hit. That for myself became a lot more painful. The not knowing part became much more painful than the whip itself. Because by, months later, yeah, you've just it doesn't really bother you. The physical part of being with doesn't really bother so much anymore. And for their amusement, they. Right.
Yes.
Okay. So as I was saying, the whipping itself, became okay, but rather just the part of not knowing that it is you or it's not you, just because of being blindfolded. And then for their amusement, they'd actually just have us fight. I mean, that was a normal thing, just to fight, especially the boys. And so, but by now I was, in my mind I was motivated of just going back home and actually, getting revenge and so by now the pure motivation of just surviving this, I had seen so many people die at this point that I knew I'd survive this. It started to really not, it's just a matter of when, not if, you know what I mean. So yeah, I made it through this, and when my leg had already been healed and everything. So to be honest, aside of those things, as long as I can be tough enough to tough those things out, and actually keep a low profile, I'd be okay. So we lived, all in all, 8 months in the overall camp, 6 of which were spent in this camp within the camp, this orphanage camp. And so 1 month first, 6 months, and then on the last month we went back to our auntie's house, my uncle's house, and then and all of this, it was just so the plan for all this. We're not gonna stay in this in this camp forever. So in all this, they started, scraping money together. We had an auntie who lived overseas, for example. We had some friends, and so the plan was to scrape money, and eventually get out of this altogether. Just leave this, and live the camp. And so when the time was right, when they actually had scraped enough money together, we got with them, and then we left the area, and we headed out of Congo. We headed first. We went to we went out of Bangui to where. I forget this town. It's also in the Congo, and I'll get you a name later. But we left this area, and from this town that I forget, we then went towards Central Africa, the Republic of I think it's called the Democratic Republic of Central Africa, and we stayed here for about 2 weeks, and then from here we went to Togo. Now. The first trip this is where we used every possible means of transportation you can imagine. The first trip out of Bangui into this town, it was by plane. It was a plane. From there on, then we took bikes. These bikes that had an extra seat mounted on them. They took us to this huge boat. It wasn't meant to be a people boat. It was actually an oil boat, some kind of oil, whether it's cooking oil or fuel or whatever. It was a cargo boat more than anything else, but on top of it, they would put things and just use that as people, which rendered the boat too heavy. Because for one, it wasn't even used. The water was very shallow. It was a lake. It wasn't, so it was really shallow. And so the oil and then the extra people that you put on it makes it so heavy. It would be stuck. Typically, we can only do it 2 to 3 days at a time. Just get stuck. We'd have to get off, and then they would dig it out, and it was just an extremely inefficient and long trip. And so we eventually left, and by now all the wars we've pretty much escaped the major, most violent parts of everything. So eventually the boat was getting stuck, and the point was to go from this town into what I believe is Kinshasa, but the boat was stuck so much that the trip was almost beginning to look impossible. So we actually got off of it about halfway through and took a bus ride into into another place, because someone alerted us. Of course, we told someone where we were trying to go, and he just gave us a better plan of how to do this. Eventually, we took this bus ride and got to into another border of Congo, but it's more of a legal border, if you may. I don't know if I say legal, but it's just a way to cross with actually, I don't actually never showing any papers or anything like that. So we did this from this little town into Central Africa. We did that by just canoes. So that tells you, they just mounted people with, and so they just took us basically across, and we got into that part. We rented a house. We don't stay here for any more than 10 days, maybe 12 days in that part of the world. And we then took a plane ride from here into Togo. We took Air Africa, I think. And so we took a plane ride from here to Togo. And life in Togo was much better. For one, no war. Just we went to school here, for example. My brother and I went to a school, purely French school. So we learned French. That's how I learned French, for example. And I actually learned Swahili the time I left Congo. I lived in Congo. I learned Swahili there, speaking also my own native language. So I was getting up to 3 languages at this point. Also in Togo they speak Mina as well, so I learned that as well over here. And so we lived here for 4 years, and and eventually after going to school and everything, we connected with a UN program that resettles families such as ourselves, which for whatever reason cannot go back to their countries. For example, our family being mixed, for example, of Tutsis and Hutus being in a country that seems somewhat that seems like it only prefers one side at a time. It just makes it impossible for us to go back. So the UN program, brings us here, resettles, for example, helps us in terms of plane tickets and whatnot. The plane is eventually work off and pay them everything in terms of plane tickets. My uncle took care of all of that for us eventually. And so we connected with it. 4 years later, we actually arrived in the U.S. and this is 1999. And eventually my brother, my uncle, he went to school here. He's an accountant now. Mom's a nurse. My brother and I, he also went to school to UB. Actually, he's a computer engineer in Chicago, and I also went to school at UB as well. I'm an electrical engineer in Kansas City, Missouri, and that's the end of that. So.
You said
So basically, I told you guys, guy comes up the hill. We don't take him seriously. We just go to sleep, after dinner and everything. But the next morning we woke up to, AK rounds, a lot of intense firing basically, and we got out of. So we decided, that's when we started taking it serious, especially for my aunt. She wasn't convinced the night before that this was really, what the guy was saying it was. So we left, and then went to another neighbor's house, and went to the same neighbor that we were playing with the night before. We went to his house to kind of gather up and see if they know anything at this point. And it turns out they didn't really know much either. It was just whatever they were hearing on the radio as well. And we stayed here throughout the day and spent the night. And then in the next morning, as we start to realize that things are becoming much more intense, and they're going out more, going door to door, and they're searching houses for houses. It becomes impossible to stay in this house because you don't want to be caught all at once in one group. You want to have the best chance of survival. So my auntie tells us, to go to Joe's house. This old friend of the family. We go to Joe's house. Then she goes to this other friend's house who lived about a half mile away from Joe. And right away, when we got to Joe's house, there was no question that would help us. Like I said, a very good friend of the family, old friend of the family. So he took us into his house, put us into a small room, sort of like a hallway closet that was isolated from the rest of the house, where you could have a good chance of not being found if it was like a random search. And we stayed here. We slept here until the late evening, I would say, and as Joe had a hint that they were coming to search his property and so for in his house, he sent us into the woods, into the woods that were growing, the set of bushes that were growing on his property, and so. And that's what I said. I took his son with me because by now I didn't really know what a Tutsi or a Hutu was. So I just took him with me because I figured, I mean, I'm only 8 and he's not that much older than me. I figured whatever we're hiding from, he probably also has to. So I actually took him with me. But then Joe called him back, and that was troubling for the longest of time because I didn't actually figure out why until later, until we left those woods and eventually left. And that was troubling the whole time. It's like I'm wondering, well, I'm hoping he's okay. I'm wondering, why he didn't have to hide with us, and that was very, very troubling for me. So. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Any questions?
I wanted to know a little bit what was going on the boat. What kind of people were you with on the boat there?
Yeah, Congo people, just a lot Congolese basically. There were a few more Rwandans. I mean, to be honest with you, there was a few people that were traveling with that I know for a fact were Rwandans, but otherwise it were people. It's sort of like if you wanna go from like here and go visit your friends in like Rochester. Obviously, you don't have a car. You'll get on a boat. So why not get on a cargo boat, pay some money? So yeah, on the boat, as I told you guys, it was a transport vessel for oil, and so there were all kinds of people going to visit their families, medicine carriers, from what I could tell. What else? Maybe some other refugees, I'm sure, who were leaving the country and actually who were living in Rwanda and going via via this route as well. And also, yeah, that's as far as I can remember. The coolest thing was when, you'd have the boat going through the lake, and you'd have these guys that come from Milan with their little small canoes, maybe machine canoes, and they would just come next to the boat and attach themselves and get out and sell fish, while the boat drags them, and then eventually when they're done, just loosen up and just drop it and go back to the land, which I thought was, and that's actually how you would get merchandise. They would have all kinds of things, fish, rice, for those who smoked, cigarettes, and all alcohol, if anything, anything you needed, and that's how you'd actually get them. So that's the kind of environment that it was.
Cool. I have a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can remember to put the question back to your answer.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please tell me your fondest memory of Rwanda?
Let me fix the mic.
Yeah, Mike's one. I should have mine on.
You just plug it up again.
Yeah, like so. Mm-hmm.
I got Justin said.
So my fondest memory of Rwanda
Mm-hmm.
is
Say something real quick. I got it, Justin.
you need to adjust the mics or just talk.
Can you
Quick.
just
Count to 10.
Oh, okay. Can you hear?
a little bit more? Just keep talking.
Okay. Is this good? 1, 2, 3. All right. We're good.
So my fondest memory of Rwanda.
Okay. Let's think. I have to think first. My fondest memory of Rwanda, I think, would be the simplicity of things before all of this. We didn't really need much to be happy, and I think that's probably the case for all of Africa. But just rather the simplicity of not needing much to be happy. Just family and friends and little toy cars that you build and so forth. That is something that I have just not been. I feel like almost everywhere else outside of Africa that I've been, and even here, it just seems that people need more to be happy than what we did. So that's probably the biggest thing I would say.
I'll just wait till you fix that, and then I got a couple more. Container state.
And
Why would keep going? I gotta stop. Start a new one.
you do what?
Sorry, stop or keep going.
Just keep going.
Camera rolling?
Yeah.
Can I go? Keep going.
Yeah, sure.
And one more thing, as far as fondest memory of Rwanda, that would also have to be obviously my family, the time that I spent with my mother, with my sister. I mentioned to you guys that the time we had was limited simply because she was a little older than me, so she was away at school most of the time, and also my father died long ago. So the time that I spent with my mother and sister in Rwanda, those were the fondest memories.
Now, that being said, I have a few more things.
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could back that up with what your name means, and
Mm-hmm.
tell us how your names are different, and
Yeah.
and what your name means.
Okay.
How
Well.
the naming system goes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. So the question comes up a lot where someone will look at my name and my brother's name and they'll compare, and I think you did too. That you asked me, because they're different, do we have the same mother and father? And yeah, we do. The naming system in our country is not such that requires for everyone to have the same last name based on their fathers, for example. It's and I'm sure today they've actually changed and you see that more common, but in the past, your name would be decided in culture anyway based on whatever environment you were born in. So for example, my name is my name is Victor, and then there's my last name is Habinshuti, and that translates exactly, friends exist or there are friends, and it's likely that I was born in an environment which had a lot of friends around. And my father's last name, for example, is also Habinshuti, but I could tell you that that's probably not so much to do with that his name is Habinshuti as much as the fact that we were probably born both in an environment that had a lot of friends, and so we came with that. My brother's last name is Dushime. His first name is Eric, and Dushime is to say, let's be thankful. Let's thank, and so it's probably that they had a lot to be grateful for when he was born. So to that effect, we'll just name him that. So that's how we choose names for. That's how names are decided in our culture.
One more question,
Mm-hmm.
and then a statement. We spent a lot of time the other day talking at school about how your uncle helped you,
Mm-hmm.
and clearly your uncle was a Hutu.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about the importance of recognizing that this was not a Hutu versus Tutsi event. It was, but
Mm-hmm.
not all.
Yes, I can actually. This it is important to realize that this was not a situation where every single Tutsi was on one side and every single Hutu was on one side. I think it's easy, especially in the society where you have to have a bad guy and a good guy. You have to have a hero and so forth. But here, these are complications. But I'm here today. My uncle's a Hutu. Joe's a Hutu who risked. Both of those guys risked their lives many times over to save my brother and I. And I could tell you of many other stories where people risked their lives, to save others. So it's important to not generalize, to just to realize that there are. Yes, there are differences, but but they're not as absolute. This is just something that happened due to the fact that a particular group of extremists, for example, decided to execute something, planned and executed something, and they just and also too, eventually they put people in situations where it's either you were on our side and you're gonna take part in the killing, or you're not and we will kill you. So there, I could tell you there will be some that actually took part in the killings, not necessarily that they believed in them, but just because just to save their own selves. And yeah, there are some other ones who decided not to take part and ensure they were killed. So it's just too much. There's a lot that has to be taken into account when one considers the differences and the actions that took place and who did what and didn't do what. So
Excellent. I do have more stuff. If you could give any advice to students today, based on your story and your life, what kind of advice would you give them?
just that which I just mentioned to you is to really spend a lot of time learning for themselves. Learning for themselves and actually, I could sit here and tell you what I think and what happened and so forth, and that's all good. But that, the way I see it, really should just be one piece of information, and you should go and verify with others. And eventually, if you read enough and you learn enough and you actually go where the situation is, then you can draw your own conclusion as to, because then if you truly know what the situation is and what your conclusion is, and if you're very informed, then the decision you make as to how to help is actually going to be much more effective. It's better to have spent 10 years learning and 1 year helping than the other way around, simply because if you just go in and it'll turn out that you're really just throwing money at the situation, and typically the money doesn't even really do much because it ends up just being used by the people, typically with the guns anyway. You know what I mean? So the learning, because learning just simply makes you more effective in how you help. So that's why. So that the biggest thing for me is to just learn. To be honest, if it turns out that you spend all your life learning, and not actually getting to the help, you know what? That's a chance I'll take. You know what I mean? That's my own personal opinion, of course, but that's the chance I'll take. Is I would rather see that you make an educated decision when it comes to these things, and then we'll go from there.
Excellent. Any questions?
From that, hey everyone, just gotta think for a second.
Okay, well, Alex is thinking you need to do one thing for us, if you could, please. And this is something that we'll cut out and put in later as part of the larger project, and we had discussed this morning. If you can just say, my name is Victor Habinshuti, I am 26?
25.
25 years old, and I'm a survivor.
Okay.
Can you say this part though right into the camera?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Ready?
Yeah.
My name is Victor Habinshuti. I'm 26 years old, and I am a survivor.
I just noticed his mic fell down. I don't know if that.
Should I start?
Yeah, we can do
Can
it
you
again.
do it one more time? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
My name is Victor Habinshuti. I am 26 years old, and I am a survivor.
Great.
You remember your question?
Yeah, you said where was it that you took the airplane to?
It was from Bangui to. I'd have to ask my dad. I'll ask my dad and I'll email you.
Well, you'll be
But-
with us. He's in the class where you're going to come in Christmas time, so
There you go. So
you can get your answer then. Any more questions?
How would you describe what was, as far as preparation wise, the rebel Tutsi soldiers?
Mm-hmm.
How were they dressed and such?
No, they were just dressed in typical camouflage.
Just real basic.
Yeah, real basic camouflage. You know, the weapon of rebels, the preferred weapon of rebels all over the world is the AK-47. It's cheap and effective, and so that's what they always had. You know, they had camouflage. And I mentioned you guys in '94 things got out, but in 1990 they also attempted to come into the country, and that was actually my first time seeing a rebel. I was maybe 4 at the time, and we were just into the city, and I saw a person. I don't know if my friends saw it or not, but he was just in the woods under some stuff, some just your regular, you've seen those movies where people are under some woods and they have some stuff attached to them to kind of blend in, and I saw him who actually had an AK pointed out, and so we just moved down. And so because there was some hostility in 1990 when they attempted it, and they failed. The same rebels failed to do that, but they actually came so far as this into the city, but a combination of is it French and Belgian troops, for sure French. I can't remember the other one, but they actually helped push them back away. So, but yeah, just your regular everyday camouflage, AK-47 and knives.
One last thing. Those memories. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Victor Victor Habinshuti is Habinshuti.
Okay. And what was your first language?
Kenya, Rwanda.
Okay.
So Rwanda with Kinya before that. So.
Would you feel comfortable saying your name, that you're a survivor in your whatever, like?
Yeah.
What's your most comfortable language now?
It's Kenya, Rwanda.
Okay.
Well, most comfortable. I don't know if there's any comfort. I speak them all
Okay.
just as well. So.
Put your mic up too.
Okay, you ready?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Alright. Nitwa Victor Habinshuti. Mfite imyaka 25 and ndi umu survivor.
Now, when you see a red Toyota pickup truck, if you think about the red Toyota pickup truck, and just discuss some of the things now that cue your memory that you might see, hear, taste, or smell today that takes you back to the genocide.
As far as tasting or smelling, none of that, to be honest with you. But anytime I see blue shoes, just any blue shoes that are really, really blue, not like light blue, but like really, really blue. Yeah, I remember my little blue shoes that I left under a counter, and I can remember the counter, the exact floor plan of the house. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. Toyota pickup truck. Every time I see one, I remember the exact same one that we got in, the same one that I saw, the same guy that we helped get into and left. So those kinds of things. And then there's nothing that really brings me to this particular memory. It's just a matter of, just not being able to forget when I saw this person laying on the ground. He was already, and now I've come to terms that he was already dead because, he had a slash in his head, and you could see brain matter out of it. And I remember trying to tell my brother this, probably because I thought for sure I saw him move, you know. But there was a truck that went by him, and you know, and it was a kind of in a ditch, and the tires on that truck moved the water, and so moved his body. So, and I remember seeing him moving. I actually pulled my brother. We should probably let's go see if he's okay and raise him up. But my brother just pulled me. He just yanked me and said, you know, he probably didn't want to tell me he's dead, you know. But that was you know. But he already knew, so we moved on. But I mean, there's no way his brain particles would be there. He wasn't dead. So, but that's the one of the memories that you're just not able to forget. And also the little the little water I saw boiling at this guy's house before we went in and helped him, which like I mentioned was not really it was at the time was kind of a stupid idea to just walk into a house. You know never really know what you would have walked into. But I mean, just imagine the most hostile environment you can find, and you find just water boiling in the yard. Wow. But yeah.
Is there anything you want to tell us?
Say again?
Is there anything you want to tell us?
No, I think that's everything. Unless you have any other questions, but
That's good.
Can I ask you one more?
yeah, go for it.
Do you dream about anything from that era? And
sometime. I mean, you know, there was this hole that I would walk by when I was running with my brother, and I saw a dead body, several in fact, under it. And sometimes I drew myself falling into it uncontrollably. Like, I don't know if you ever play Mortal Kombat, where you're just falling in this giant hole, and you know what I mean. And so sometimes I drew myself falling in a hole similar to that, but only at the end of it is that same hole that I remember before. But other than that, nothing. Other than that, nothing else. So.
Great. Everybody good?
Thanks.
Excellent.